I just want to touch on a few issues, and that is because I know you're strong enough to deal with the issues and to help us. The first relates to the NGOs. You were asked about your membership of an NGO. Tell me if I'm wrong, and I've said it in one of the judgments that I have written. One gets a sense that NGOs show their hand when there is something to challenge about how the country is run, but hardly ever when issues like incidents of racism show up, incidents of employment equity arise, like two stories that I've cited, having read in the newspaper, of a black person, same qualifications with a white person in the corporate sector, experiencing a margin of underpayment that goes up to 20,000 rands. Even if the black man, and I restrict it to males, is highly qualified than a white male, and also a white woman never earns the same in those some of these corporate in the corporate, some of these companies never earns the same salary as a white colleague, but will certainly earn more than a black man, who in turn earns more than a black woman. It doesn't matter how experienced you are. That is the one issue that I'm raising. I wonder why the NGOs never say anything or challenge these things in a court of law to say there's resistance to the implementation of employment equity. The management of our companies, big companies, has been too white and male for a long time. No voice is heard. And so I'm talking about NGOs. And you know the relevance? As a judge, when these things come before you, your world outlook is likely to inform how you deal with cases relating to these matters when they come before you. And two, I don't see much activism relating to land redistribution. I don't see much activism, say, relating to, well, how do we make sure that, to the extent that much of the land is in the hands of our white compatriots, what needs to be done? Let's find a solution, or let's challenge some of the problems that might be there. And finally, I don't see much activism from the NGOs in relation to ensuring that there is meaningful participation in the economy of this country, also by the previously disadvantaged, including women. Why? Am I mistaken? Or is that the reality as you have experienced it? And if so, why? And again, I must explain this by saying, as a judge, you are expected to be conscious of the injustices of the past and play a role as and when the facts and the law allow you to help heal the country by rendering just judgments that will normalize the otherwise abnormal situation that obtains in South Africa. Do you have a comment there?
Well, I suppose my comment...
I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying, is my observation right or wrong?
Yes. Chief Justice, I think it is true that NGOs have a particular focus, and that sometimes means that they concentrate on particular cases to the exclusion of others, and not every NGO can do every case. I think that there are NGOs that cover some of the issues that you speak of. For example, the Legal Resources Centre does significant work around land and land redistribution and the like. It may be that the NGO world is always partial in the interests that it manifests in particular areas. So there's been a lot of prominence given to rule of law issues and institutional integrity questions, and it may be that hence their programs have not covered all the areas that they should. But I do still think it correct by and large that we have a very dynamic and active NGO sector which covers a lot of ground. It may not cover all the ground and all the ground it should, but it covers a lot of ground, including some of the areas that you've referenced. And just the last observation to make, which is that apart from what NGOs do, there are members of the bar who act pro bono very often in leading cases where there has been injustice. And more of that should happen than it does, but that's another way in which recourse does occur in many instances where there are cases of this kind.
No. Here is where I'm coming from. There are things that are responsible for the extreme inequalities that South Africans are experiencing right now. There are things that continue to divide us as a nation. They pop up from time to time, and racism is one of them. I, speaking as a South African and as a judge, would expect those with the capacity to challenge these injustices, commentators on television, radio, those who write in newspapers, to raise awareness about these embarrassing developments. And knowing how racism has divided us, even for the NGOs to say this injustice must be tackled head on. But I often experience dead silence from the NGOs. You know how emotive the land issue is. You hear people talk about language, but not about the land issue in the sense of let there be restitution. People have been saying, I haven't checked it myself, but it hasn't really been gainsaid, that when you go to the stock exchange, for instance, you don't see much presence of the previously disadvantaged. When you look at the economy, you don't see much presence of the previously disadvantaged. Where is the voice of the NGOs there? That's what I'm wondering. It looks like the NGOs are focusing on something else, but on those things that cause a lot of harm and hurt, that disadvantaged the majority. You don't see a hand being raised there. And excuse me, I may be ignorant. I seek to understand so that when a judge who comes from an NGO becomes a judge, I have the comfort that, this one, when matters of this nature come before him or her, he'll make sure, as he has been doing, as she has been doing, that the injustices of the past are as required by the Constitution, dealt with firmly and properly.
Yes. Chief Justice, there's no question that the matters that you reference are important questions of injustice that need to be both raised and dealt with in the courts where appropriate. I don't have a sufficient conspectus of all the work that NGOs do, but I would just say that there are NGOs that certainly work on land issues. Whether they have brought the right cases sufficiently clearly to the courts, I'm not sufficiently cited to say. And similarly, in respect of employment equity issues, there are NGOs who work in these fields. Yes. And it may be that their work is just not always as highlighted as other work that is done by NGOs.
What I've picked up is that those that work on the land issue are those that say, government, you should have done this. You didn't do this. I haven't come across those that says, a strategy needs to be developed for those who have more land to realize that unless this issue is addressed and addressed properly, not in an emotive way, in a manner that will heal the country, the strategy must be there to make sure that this thing is dealt with before it overtakes us. I haven't seen those. It's a question of government. As you do this, consider also having a plan in place to fund those that land is restituted to so that they can become effective farmers. That's how far they go. But anyway,